Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Nick Speed from Corby and Kettering Amnesty Group, and welcome to our webinar, Local Voices, Global Activism. We're just going to start with a quick poll. Thank you. Thank you. We have a packed programme today, and most of our speakers could easily fill a couple of hours on their own topic. So today is about getting a snapshot of some of the diverse and important campaign work that goes on in our area and giving you ideas about how to get more involved. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we begin. There will be an opportunity for questions, and I'd encourage you to put forward questions on each topic at the end of each talk, and you can put these in the questions box. I can't promise we'll have time for all of them, but we will be issuing summary notes and contact details after the event if you wish to follow up with any of our speakers. Our first two speakers, John Padwick and Des Dowell, have recently been campaigning on different teams in the local elections, but they do have a shared passion for our local countryside. And today they're here as part of the Save Weekley Hall Woods campaign. Before their talk, I believe we have a short video clip.
We love our countryside. We need our countryside. We do not want our countryside destroyed. This is Weekley Hall Wood, and we want to save Weekley Hall Wood. For the thousands of residents for whom this area is essential, for the runners and the cyclists, for the dog walkers, for the families, for people's mental well-being, for our community, especially in this time of crisis, and for all the wildlife that will be lost forever if this area is destroyed. We need your help to protect this beautiful and thriving habitat. Developers want to turn this landscape into more warehouses. We say no. We have had enough. We do not want any more of our countryside destroyed. But these warehouses are only the start. This entire area could become another soulless industrial estate unless we stop it. Please help us save Weekley Hall Wood.
Thank you, Nick. So Save Weekley Hall Woods is more than a campaign. It's become something of a movement, and I will just wait for the slides to appear before I continue. There we go. So I'm Des, by the way, and the campaign itself, it started just as the pandemic hit in the spring of 2020. Nobody had noticed that the planning application that went up that threatened the wood and the wildflower meadow until I saw a post by a friend on Facebook. It turned out there were only 3 days left to go before the deadline for objections to the council. So we immediately set up an online petition, and it gained 3,000 signatures that weekend. Next slide. This is the area affected, and the application was put in by Weekley Properties, which is the business end of a large local landowner, the Duke of Weekley and the Weekley estate, and that is to build. Next slide, please. Speculative warehousing. There is already a large amount of warehousing in the local area because of the transport links, but they want to build more warehouses just on the off chance that they might get filled up, bearing in mind that we have a lot of empty warehousing already. 40,000 square metres of woodland would be affected, including the closest section of Buckingham Forest to Kettering. This is Weekley Wood, the species-rich wildlife meadow, and developers claim it will create 700 jobs. So, next slide, please. I'm a member of the Green Party. I was recently elected, the first ever time a Green Party member has been elected to the council in Northamptonshire. So it's clearly an issue for us. However, it was never a political campaign. And we quickly attracted widespread support from a wide group of people and local organisations, including the local Labour Party and the Cooperative Party, which John's a member, Greenpeace, Friends of the Earth, the Woodland Trust, many other local groups. Next slide, please. 2 forward, please. That's it. We recruited help from friends, impassioned residents, and our existing network of local activists. We established the Save Weekley Wood community group with a formal constitution. These are some of those people. Next slide, please. So the area, it would not only cause major environmental damage, but it's clear that it would be also robbing local people of part of the natural heritage that they had enjoyed for decades. So
next slide.
So from dog walkers to runners, and the land is part of the Weekley estate, but public rights of way run very close to it, and the people have been using it for years. Children and families explore out in the woods and bike around it, and we've had so many people come forward to send pictures of their kids enjoying the area. John.
There is a historic parallel. In 1607, 4 years after James I came to the throne, and just 2 years after the Gunpowder Plot, with its local connections to Northamptonshire, 1,000 people, men, women and children, had gathered at Newton, a tiny hamlet, it's still a tiny hamlet in Northamptonshire, about half an hour's walk from Weekley Wood. They were protesting in a dispute about land rights and the enclosure of common land, and they were pulling down the hedges and filling in the ditches that Thomas Tresham had put in to enclose the Brand, which was a patch of common land on the outskirts of Rockingham Forest, just like Wood on the outskirts of Rockingham Forest, but this time it was between Geddington and Little Oakley. The land had been used by the local peasantry for subsistence farming, time out of mind, and people at the time were really, really hard up. Bad harvesting, poor harvesting, bad weather, bad winters, bad summers, a lot of rain, just like today, really. But they've been using it time out of mind. These peasants were led by Captain Pouch, a tinker, who told the protesters to behave without violence. He told them he had in his satchel or pouch on his belt something that would protect them from all harm. The Newton Rebellion was actually part of a bigger, much wider movement against enclosure, the Midland Revolt in 1607, which has been seen as the last time the peasantry of England rose up against the gentry. The king became worried about this, and James I commanded that the insurrections were put down by force if necessary, and he told the Deputy Lieutenant of the Council, Edward Montague, precursor of the Duke of Buccleuch, to do just that. Montague tried to get the local militia to come out, but they refused to turn out. So Montague and Tresham had to use their own servants and troops to charge the assembled protesters. Letters of the gentry report that 40 to 50 people were killed. That's letters of the gentry, so they were people who were not likely to overestimate the numbers. So it could well have been more. Captain Pouch's satchel, his pouch, was found, and according to the chronicles, all they found in it was a piece of green cheese. I wonder if that was the effective demystification of a troublemaker who, along with others, was hanged and quartered, with his bits hung up as a warning in the local towns, including Northampton and Thrapston. Who said that social media and fake news is a 21st century phenomenon, as long as you've got the chronicles behind you? There was an inquiry into the enclosures, which were illegal, and the landowners were fined, but they were allowed to keep the land they enclosed. End of. Except it wasn't. I think do we need to go on to the next slide now? Next slide. Yeah, there you see Weekley Hill Woods. That's in 1886. We'll come on to that in a minute. So it wasn't end of, it wasn't the end. It left us a fundamental question. And that question is, who actually owns the land? Whose land is it? This also underlines the Weekley Wood application. Clearly, the Buccleuch family own the land by law, but thinking back to the Newton Rebellion, is there a deeper land ownership issue here? However, the legal position is clearly that the land is part of the Buccleuch estate, and the local clan, part of a strategic planning framework that had been agreed some years previously, had allocated this land that we're talking about for employment purposes. This is how it looked in 1886, and the next slide shows what it looks like now. So one forward, please. So you can see this, the similar outline of the wood is still there with some additional parts, which is the part that we're interested in down the bottom left there. Can we go to the next slide, please? So we set up an online petition, which, as mentioned, got 3,000 in one weekend. We've just gone over 15,000 signatures on the petition. And we also set up Facebook, Instagram, Twitter accounts as well to raise awareness. One of the things that's been key is we linked up with a local photographer, and those images have proved to be a real asset to the campaign. If you go to the next slide, please. The closing date for the objections was extended, and over 600 objections were lodged. However, the application still hasn't been heard, although it was expected to be determined many months ago. Since then, Kettering Borough Council has been abolished and replaced by the unitary North Northamptonshire Council, who will be responsible for planning. It's possible, therefore, that the application will be heard by councillors who have little knowledge or understanding of the local issues. However, I am now one of those councillors, so we'll see. I hope I'd have an understanding of the issues.
A difficulty here, though, is that there's likely to be little notice of the meeting when the decision will be made. So we as a group need to be ready for that eventuality. Hopefully, though, I should get a heads up on that. The next slide, please. So as part of the campaign, we've had regular Zoom meetings. We had them weekly last year, and we tried to get as many members of the team along. We've got about 10, 11 members now. And we've always had different specialities within the team. So some of us are more engaged with the planning process, others with the local community and the media. And we've got an amazing graphic designer on board, somebody that knows about websites. We've developed knowledge about the biodiversity of the area, so we can add in those ecological reports and things. And we've also approached the family themselves. Next slide, and John.
Yes, we've challenged the principles of the allocation of land for employment. As I said earlier, it was allocated many years back for employment purposes, and that's fixed in that local plan. It's difficult to shift, but we've challenged it. And that had been agreed, we argue, way before the two major crises that have a huge bearing on the issue, the climate emergency and COVID. It became clear that during the pandemic, the use of the woods and the meadow for recreation had increased, although it had anyway been really popular before. But now, even more walkers, cyclists and runners were using it daily, and they continue to do so. We carried out surveys in the summer, which showed that at a weekend, over 1,000 people were using it each day, and during the week, over 700 people were using it. We read a huge amount of documentation, a huge amount, piles of it, both directly relating to the application itself, which came to over 150 reports, and pretty wordy and planning jargony reports too, but also planning reports and key strategic documents. We attended and spoke at many council meetings, including the Planning Policy Committee, to try to get councillors to agree that COVID and the climate emergency affected the situation, and that the allocation of the land for employment should be reconsidered. It became clear, however, that acting on the advice of the planning officers and going by the rule book, the members of the committee weren't able to do this, although a number were sympathetic. We've continued to keep a watch on developments, especially as the Joint Core Strategy, which is the Bible in planning, is in the process of being reviewed. We're not sure yet how that review might affect Weekley or Wood. So planning was a major disappointment and a steep learning curve. We continue to plough on, sorry, go on, Des.
Sorry, carry on.
We continue to plough on regardless, building local support. People continued to sign the petition, and the message was pushed out on social media. Our positive relationship with the local press has been really, really important, pretty fundamental really, and press releases to keep them informed were regularly sent out.
Sorry, can you go back a slide, please? Thank you. So our group includes people with very different areas of knowledge and expertise, as mentioned, from IT and social media to planning and knowledge about the environment and the natural world. A particularly important aspect has been our use of graphic design and photography. Two of our members have amazing skills. They have been key to communicating our message through social media, leaflets, at an early stage a poster for children to colour in, which we encouraged people to put in their windows. Another member runs a local forest school whose children enjoy the facilities of the wood as a real and unique wilderness and learning experience. And we even had a member create jam in the wood from blackberries picked there.
Very good it was too.
Next slide, please. So we've marketed the wood as the forest on your doorstep. And our message, wildlife not warehouses, has been used by us for t-shirts, which we've sold online and in local outlets. We've used a brilliant local sign writer to produce placards, which have now been displayed at the entrance to the wood and at the major roundabout, which is nearby, so the message gets out to everyone driving in the area. At Christmas, we produced a Save Weekley or Wood calendar, which if you click, we should see that, and which sold out, and it features photographs from our members and also the public. The sale of the t-shirts and the calendar have enabled us to build funds for commissioning experts to assist us. We've also had a theme song written for us by a local musician, Tom Oy, which we will hear at the end.
The environmental and biodiversity value of the land is clearly important. We've involved local people and groups to help us record species of the plants, really trying to engage people. The second, not just professionals, but also the community. The second phase of the application, the next bit, would actually destroy an amazing cowslip meadow, and cowslips are also prevalent across the rest of the land. Grasshopper warblers can be heard and sometimes seen in the early summer. Bees, butterflies and badgers and more, including the sighting of a great crested newt. So planning, continued local engagement and building the case for biodiversity are three prongs to our approach, but we've also made an attempt to develop a relationship with the estate and the Montague Scott Douglas family to demonstrate our commitment to the local area, to show how widespread the love of the area is in question, and to suggest to them that a more positive legacy for the family might be protection of the woods rather than its destruction, through the establishment of a country park based on the Buccleuch Estate's principles of education, environment and community. And I think you can move forward to the next slide. And the next slide. There we go. Thank you. The work on building that relationship, the relationship with the family and the estate, is ongoing. And we've already held a Zoom meeting with key members of the estate staff, and another one's planned. It would be fair to say, however, that we've tried several times directly to build a relationship with the family itself, with the Duke and his family, but that has met with little success, but we will persevere. With all of this groundwork going on, as already stated, we need to be vigilant and ready with our arguments when and if the planning application comes to committee. We won't get much notice. The dead of Newton would expect no less. Maybe with social media, brilliant graphics and Tom Oy's songs, things would have turned out different in 1607.
Thank you. And I think now we might have a little piece of Tom Oy's song, which we will warn you becomes a bit of an earworm.
It really does. I'm not singing it, Des.
I think we've got a video, we don't have to sing it.
I could hum it. That's the wrong video. This is the right one.
More trees equals more oxygen to breathe when we really need some CO2 to leave. Save Weekley Harwood, cause breathing is really good. You can help unload the problems in your life with fresh air and walking off some strife. Stretch your legs, hear the birds singing from that hedge. Kettering comes together to enjoy the woods in every weather. Get on through rain or shine, come and play, it's nature time. Running, climbing, riding bikes, it's a place to exercise, you work out right. Fun and cardio, loosen up, feel your blood flow. There's empty warehouses all over town where they need to tear all the wildlife down. Save Weekley Harwood, cause living things are good. Kettering comes together to enjoy the woods in every weather. Get on through rain or shine, come and play, it's nature time. Wanna make money some other way? Open a nice woodland cafe. Who doesn't love tea and cake? Duke save the day. Kettering comes enjoy the woods in every weather. Get on through rain or shine, come and play, it's nature time. Save Weekley Harwood, 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 save Weekley Harwood.
Excellent. Thank you, John and Des, for a very rousing start to our webinar. Apologies to you and to our listeners for a bit of noise on the line earlier on. I hope that didn't detract too much. I'll explain what that was a little bit later. Audience, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. I've got one for now directed to Des, please. I know you're very early in the councillor role and it may be too early to say, but do you have an idea how the council is split on this issue? Is there a lot of opposition to the campaign from councillors, or is there a lot of support?
That's a good question. We don't really know. With the new unitary, it's still too early to say how the planning process will work. You know, all of the councillors there are new to the unitary. There are some councillors that are from previous administrations, but it is a case that we're not sure how the planning process is going to work. I think there's an area planning committee for each of the different areas in Northamptonshire, so presumably they would take responsibility for this, for these kind of decisions. But obviously, it's about material planning considerations at the end of the day with the planning process. You can't you're not going to get things like this stopped just for some great crested newts and things like that, because so there's a lot to do, a lot of arguments to put towards that to hopefully stop the development.
Okay, and is the petition still live? Can people still sign up to that if they haven't already?
Yes, absolutely. The address for that is bit.ly/save our wood petition. Great,
thank you. And I mentioned at the beginning that we'll be sending out notes to everybody, and there is a link to the website. Are there any other actions that people can take if they're keen to get involved?
Yeah, absolutely. Follow us and like us on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. We're Save Weekley Wood on all of those. If you ever go to the wood, take some photos, send them our way. We love seeing people's pictures that we get sent, and we often do post them on our socials.
We've got a question from Holly. Is the petition on change.org?
It is.
Yes, I think I've seen it posted by Jamie Wildman.
That's right, yes.
Yeah, if you look out for if you look that up with Jamie Wildman and the Save Weekley Woods on change.org. And I've just been reminded, obviously Holly's worked it out, but it's not the chat, it's the questions box if you have any questions. Okay, thank you again very much, Des and John. We're going to move on to the next section. And before I introduce our next speaker, I'd like to reference a different local campaign on an environmental topic that led to a successful outcome, albeit one that took some 10 years of campaigning to reach. In the late 80s and 90s, there were an abnormally high number of birth defects in Corby, children being born with missing fingers, for example. 18 families eventually took their case to court, claiming that the council had failed to safely deal with the toxic waste from the steelworks and had permitted toxic waste to disperse into the atmosphere. The judge agreed with them. Their case was historically significant as the first in the world to establish a link between atmospheric toxic waste and birth defects, and had parallels with the Erin Brockovich case on poisoned water in California. As a member of Amnesty for over 30 years, I increasingly see human rights and environmental campaigns running in parallel, as those who try to stand up for their land, their health, or to protect their climate are targeted by those who seek economic gain. Our next speaker will tell us more about this. Sheila Royce was one of the first members of Corby Amnesty Group. And among other things, Sheila is the regional team coordinator for Mexico and Central America. Thank you, Sheila.
Thanks, Nick. And just like to say thank you to the organisers as well for putting on this event, and thanks for inviting me to speak. Yes, when it comes to protecting the environment that we live in, there are some places in the world where it really can get you into trouble. In fact, it can cost you your life. According to Global Witness, 212 people were killed in 2019 for peacefully defending their homes and for standing up to the destruction of nature. That was the highest number of murders of land and environmental defenders ever recorded in a single year. And one of the most dangerous places to be an environmental defender is Latin America. In 2019, the Central American country of Honduras had the highest number of killings of land and environmental defenders per head of population. The situation in Honduras has deteriorated greatly since a military coup in 2009. Human rights defenders, journalists, community leaders and environmental activists are killed, injured and subjected to threats and intimidation on a regular basis. Before the coup, the sitting president had been working on land reform that would have given campesino communities titles to their land, but the coup put a stop to all of that. And ever since then, we've seen land grabs and a huge rise in environmentally damaging mega projects that have displaced Indigenous communities, and in many cases left them with little choice but to join the migrant trail northwards into Mexico and the United States. In many cases, big businesses just move into these communities. Often overnight, they put up fences and bring in their heavy earth shifting gear without the knowledge or consent of the local people in many cases. So whether they're building dams, mining, logging, farming palm oil, or building tourism projects, the work they do often destroys a community's source of food, water, medicine, and in some cases, spiritual support. Whole areas just become militarized. The army are brought in and private security firms, armed to the teeth, are employed against peaceful protesters. And community leaders are targeted in particular. If I could have the first picture, please. One such leader was Berta Cáceres, pictured here. Berta grew up an activist. Her mother was a midwife who opened young Berta's eyes to the miserable conditions of families in neglected rural communities. Her mother also helped to organise against death squads that operated across Central America. So in some ways it was no surprise that at 18, Berta travelled to El Salvador to join the national resistance. But when she returned and co-founded an organisation called COPIN to fight for the territorial rights of the indigenous Lenca community, Berta was absolutely convinced that the way forward was an unarmed social movement, no guns. Unfortunately, the same could not be said for the big businesses, who enjoyed the backing and support of the military and routinely sought to exploit vital natural resources illegally without the free, prior and informed consent of the affected communities, in complete violation of international treaties. Berta was a tenacious environmental human rights defender, winner of the prestigious Goldman Environmental Prize in 2015. With COPIN, she led a campaign to stop construction of a hydroelectric dam on a river that was considered sacred by the Lenca people. The company behind the dam had very powerful backers and military support, so the local community had turned to Berta and COPIN to ask for their help. Berta warned them that protest was dangerous and could put people at risk, but together they decided to resist, systematically organising roadblocks while maintaining a peaceful presence. Berta had been the target of repeated threats, attacks and intimidation for many, many years. They'd also threatened her family, they'd threatened her children, but she refused to be silenced. Attempts were made to criminalise her, a gun was planted in her vehicle and she was arrested and charged. The charges were dropped eventually, but Berta knew that her name was on a military hit list. When they want to kill me, they will, she said. Threats against Berta, Copine and the community was so commonplace that they regarded them as normal. But Berta had pitted herself against some very powerful forces and she was shot dead in her home in March 2016. Murdered for protecting the rights of Indigenous people, for protecting the water, rivers and environment. She died much too young at just 44, at a time when our world's Indigenous peoples and natural resources are under sustained attack from unsustainable greed and consumption. Most murders in Honduras don't even get investigated, let alone prosecuted. Hard to believe maybe, but that is a fact. But there was huge international outcry when Berta was murdered. It even made it into the UK press, and Central America is not an area that ever sees much coverage over here. But there was a trial, and 7 men were found guilty and convicted of the murder. All of the men had links either to the company or to the military, or both. We're still campaigning to bring justice, not just those to bring to justice, sorry, not just those responsible for the criminal act, but those that actually ordered the killing. Because that's really important in terms of justice for Berta and her family, but also for the safety of other defenders. And one trial is still ongoing. The president of the company behind the dam is on trial for ordering the killing, but that's not been straightforward in any way. It's been arranged and postponed 10 times, but is now underway again, though we're anticipating more delays. Also, it's unlikely that he would have been the only one involved in masterminding the murder, so our fight to bring everyone responsible to justice is likely to continue. I really can't overstate the shock that was felt within the community and worldwide when Berta was killed. She was such a high-profile defender. It was assumed that this would give her a degree of protection because that's normally the case. The fear is that if they can kill someone like Berta Cáceres, they can kill anyone. And the threats and intimidation have continued. Indeed, a colleague of Berta's, Nelson Garcia, was killed just 12 days after Berta was murdered, increasing the terror within the community. And since then, supporters have continued to receive verbal death threats, to suffer intimidation and have their crops destroyed, forcing families to move on. Berta is the most high-profile case, but it's by no means an isolated one. Human rights defenders in whatever field they work in face high levels of violence. Attempts are routinely made to discredit them. They're confronted with smear campaigns on social media. There are attempts to criminalise them and their work. The authorities will claim that they've got links to organised crime. They'll say that they're radical groups. They'll call them terrorists and enemies of development. And that fuels hostility and violence within the communities. Because there are high levels of poverty in these communities, so there are inevitably some that will welcome these developments as a source of employment and income. And sweeteners are used to bring some locals on board and to establish a network of informers. Communities are promised infrastructure, they're promised schools, medical centres, if they'll just support these projects, but these very, very rarely materialise. And gradually it's tearing these communities apart. But defending water, rivers, environment, livelihoods is not a crime. Indeed, the defenders would say it's work that protects all of us because it's protecting the environment. It's important work, it's legitimate work. But as I said, Berta is not alone. If I could have the next picture, please. In July last year, 5 Garifuna activists were taken from their homes at gunpoint by individuals in police clothing. The Garifuna are Black Afro-Indigenous people living on the north coast of Honduras. The 5 men are fishermen, and communities in that region are involved in a long-standing protest and a struggle to save their ancestral land from drug traffickers, palm oil magnates, and tourism developers, and their whereabouts are still unknown. If I could have the next picture, please, as well. Another current action in Honduras concerns the jailing of 8 men for peacefully protesting against the exploitation of the fresh water supply to their community in Guapanal by private business interests. In 2018, unknown to the community, a mining company had been granted a licence by the government to operate locally, even though the area was a natural park and it was protected by law. The people of Guapanal began to organise peaceful protests to stop the mining company's activities. They wanted proper consultation and wanted to protect the Guapanal River a vital source of fresh water to all the community. In October 2018, warrants were issued for the arrest of 31 members of the community. The highly dubious charges ranged from damaging property, false imprisonment, theft, aggravated arson, and unlawful association. One group decided to hand themselves in and the charges were dropped. So, encouraged by that, a further 8 did the same. But in their case, the judge issued a pre-trial detention order and the men were imprisoned. Now, there's no evidence that the alleged crimes even ever took place, let alone that these men were involved. In fact, one of the men named on the original warrant had died 3 years previously, but the 8 men were detained in September 2019 and are still in prison. And unfortunately, an appeals court recently reversed the earlier ruling that had discharged the first group and has now reopened the case against 5 of them. So it's a very worrying situation. If I could have the next picture, please. If you think about these communities, they're very rural and they're mostly very isolated. In the past, they felt very alone and have largely been unaware that the problems that they're going through are also being experienced by other communities. But a lot of work has been done to start forging alliances between them. An amazing lawyer, Donald Hernandez, pictured here, represents Indigenous communities affected by mining, agribusiness and hydroelectric projects and provides legal defence for criminalised human rights defenders. Many, many times Donald has been offered lucrative government positions, but he prefers to continue his work with poor rural communities to fight against the destruction and contamination of their land and water supplies. But working to protect water sources and land has turned defenders like Donald Hernandez and those he represents into enemies of the state and private business. He told us how he carefully changes his routine and habits for his own security and is busy teaching Indigenous leaders to do the same to try to help keep them safe. Donald and his team are establishing networks among all the different groups that are affected. Many defenders simply don't trust the police protection that they may be granted, so they're setting up their own protection mechanisms, whether that be solidarity camps, a system of alerts nationally, letters, phone calls to ambassadors, international lobbying and networking. It's a great, great step forward in them helping themselves. When Berta was killed, there was a phrase that started to circulate. It was, "Berta didn't die, she multiplied." And that is true. Her daughter has taken over the reins at Copine in her place, and all her children are carrying on her work despite the risks. So many people have taken up the cause, and people all over the world have been involved in the fight for justice for Berta and in support of the Lenca people. We aim to help continue that fight because the threat of assassination is still all too real for anyone who's still brave enough to stand up to the mega projects and to protect the environment, to protect the Indigenous communities, and to protect the environmental defenders. If I could have the next slide, please. To give a final word to Berta Cáceres. On the next slide. Yeah, we must undertake the struggle in all parts of the world, wherever we may be, because we have no other spare or replacement planet. We have only this one, and we have to take action. In her acceptance speech for the Goldman Prize, Berta cried out, "Wake up, humanity, there's no more time." Berta fought passionately for what she believed in. She deserves justice. Those who still face threats for continuing her work deserve our protection, our support, our activism. 7 men would never have been convicted of Berta's murder if it wasn't for the international outcry at her killing. If it wasn't for the campaigns of Amnesty and other organisations like them, and if it wasn't for all the ordinary people all over the world who've joined the campaign and the calls for justice. And the company owner certainly wouldn't be on trial for masterminding the murder. There's been no progress in the case of the Garifuna activists, unfortunately, but as the anniversary of their disappearance occurs in July, we will renew our efforts and mark the day to ensure that they're not forgotten. And we'll keep campaigning to get the Guapanol 8 freed from jail unconditionally and with the charges dropped, because peacefully protesting to defend water, rivers and the environment is not a crime. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Sheila. we're still waiting for questions coming in through the question box. I have one that's come in from Liam. I don't know if you know, Sheila, whether there are any specific companies which sell, companies in the UK which are involved in the environmental destruction which we should boycott?
That's a great question. There aren't presently. I say presently. I was actually in a meeting this week just with some government ministers from Honduras, and they were making a plea to the UK government to put some funds into Honduras and into various projects. There was actually a speech in the House of Lords this week as well, asking for it. So I think it's something that we're really going to look out for, because what's happened recently, as well as the COVID, there's been two really enormous hurricanes in Honduras that hit within the space of a week, and the country was devastated. I mean, there was massive environmental damage just from that. So there was lots of flooding and environmental damage. So quite reasonably, you know, they are looking for funds for help. Some of that obviously is going to include maybe dams to help with stop flooding and stuff like that. But obviously we're really concerned that if this is done, that it needs to be done in the proper way, which isn't what's happening at the moment. As I say, it's all been done without the informed consent of the communities. It's just been done against their will. So I was quite concerned. They said, I think the ambassador said they had 85 plus projects that they were wanting some funding for, and they have these in plans. And given the history and the way things have progressed in the past, I'd be very concerned that this won't be done in the correct manner, and that we have to ensure that human rights safeguards are put into any contracts that happen as a result of this. So we'll be keeping a very close eye on what the UK does, because the UK has been quite an ally in this time. They've tried to help out in the recent situation. So I think there may be companies that will try and invest, but we do have to be careful. You'd be surprised at some of the places that have. I mean, there's been influence from China. It's actually been Canadian companies that have been the surprise ones, and they've got a lot of firms that have been investing in similar projects in Guatemala. I mean, one of the things we often say is that this is happening in Honduras, but seriously, you know, I could just change the names and the dates, and it could be in Guatemala.
Yeah,
It could be talking about Mexico. I could be talking about Colombia. I could be talking about any, you know, most Latin American countries. So currently, no, there isn't, but we're keeping a very close eye on it.
And what about companies that fund the destruction of forests?
There's some improvement happening there. There's actually, again, something this week that there's funds that one of the Honduran banks had applied for, and the guy that owns the bank is he's not one of the owners of the company, but he owns a bank that is funding them, and they had applied for a big loan and it's been turned down, which is good news. The Chinese were funding a lot of stuff. When the killing of Berta happened, they pulled out. Things must be getting bad if the Chinese are pulling out. That's all I can say. There's also been a Finnish bank that was involved, and I think they've withdrawn as well. So we're keeping an eye on all of those things, but it's very difficult. But we're trying to get through that way. And as I say, if the UK starts to get involved, then we'll be able to up what we do in the UK.
Okay, and then a question from John. What can we do to make more people aware and make a difference?
Well, you can stay informed. I mean, it's very difficult in the UK with this region. As I say, we don't really get a great deal of publicity. It was very unusual. But if you join someone like Amnesty, if you join the local Amnesty group, if that's not an option, please, when the details go out after this meeting, you'll have my email address. Please just sign up. You can go on our mailing list, and we regularly, every 2 months, we have newsletters that go out with updates on all the issues throughout Central America and Mexico, and there are usually campaign actions that go with it. I was hoping to have an action today because COPINA busy designing one as part of the trial that's ongoing. I was hoping to arrive yesterday, but it didn't. So, but we will have that to go out shortly. So that would be great. You can follow us on Twitter and Facebook. We're always putting stuff up there and on the campaign. So I just urge people to get involved, because these things affect us all, even if not directly, certainly indirectly. So please, click on these petitions, like the one that they've just been talking about at Weekley Woods. Send that card and do, just very easy to do things just from the comfort of your own home, and it costs us nothing. But you could be saving a life when you think of the number of defenders that are being killed at the moment.
Thank you very much, Sheila.
No worries, thank you.
Lots of food for thought there. Okay. Before we move on to our next speaker, we may have some technical difficulties, but we'll keep our fingers crossed. Just another brief dive into the past. So those from Kettering will probably be familiar with the name William Knibb. In November 1824, William Knibb of Kettering sailed to Jamaica as a missionary and schoolmaster. He stood up against the injustices that he witnessed, and as a result was threatened and targeted. He returned to England in 1832 to plead the cause of the slaves, and was summoned to appear before committees of both Houses of Parliament. It was reported that Knibb's evidence was so authentic and unassailable that it contributed more than that of any other witness to the conviction of all that slavery must be speedily abolished. Laws were put in place to abolish slavery as we think of it in that historical context. Unfortunately, that's not the end of the story. The next speaker, who I hope will be able to join us in a moment, I'm slightly stretching the term local. Chair of Thetford Amnesty Group, Simon John, is currently attempting, in very strong winds, a bike ride from Land's End to John O'Groats to highlight the issue of modern day slavery. He's paused on a short break in between his bike ride. Hence, he was at the side of the road and getting some noise on the line before. So I'm hoping he can join us. Simon, can you hear me and can you connect?
Can you hear me?
We can hear you. We can't see you, but we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm not sure that's going to work. So shall we just go with voice?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about the technical difficulties, but I've had some technical difficulties last night, particularly when my bike was wrecked. But anyway, so I'm here now, and so good afternoon, everybody, and thank you very much for coming to this event. My name's Simon John. I'm a retired lawyer from Norfolk, although I was actually brought up in Leicestershire. And quite often went down to your neck of the woods. So I'm here to talk about modern day slavery, which has grown exponentially since its abolition, ironically, in the 19th century. During the period of transatlantic slavery, we know that there were over 350 years, some 12 to 13 million Africans trafficked across the Atlantic in the bottom of those awful boats in what became known as the Middle Passage of Three, the first from the UK to Africa, then and other European countries, to be fair, and then across the Middle Passage to the New World, and then home. Well, slavery in general today is defined as the violent control of one person by another for profit. And that's what it's all about, money. It always was, and it so remains, obscene profit. And those houses that we find littered around our countryside, those grandiose houses, many of them, the National Trust admitted earlier this year, were built on the obscene profits of transatlantic slavery. Today, it seems, slaveholders tend to put their money into very expensive motors. So today, the increase, you would have expected it to decrease, wouldn't you? But the increase in slavery is not tenfold from 40,000. Yes, 40,000 was the number of slaves that can be calculated approximately at any one time in the New World during that period of transatlantic slavery. And that wasn't, of course, all the slavery in the world, but it was a significant part of it. So it's not increased 10 times from 40,000 to 400,000, nor 100 times from 40,000 to 4 million. No, it's increased 1,000-fold from 40,000 to 40 million slaves around the world today. And about 200,000, give or take 200,000 of those are in the UK right now. And they're there for two reasons. First of all, because we, in the famous words of Bob Dylan, cannot open our eyes and see them around us. Now, there are various, if you like, cognitive reasons for this, because we have a picture stuck in our mind of a slave as a black man wearing tattered clothing and looking very 17th or 18th, 16th, 17th, 18th century, and wearing handcuffs, or strictly speaking manacles, which are a longer version of handcuffs, leg irons, and there's a white man, usually wearing a hat, behind him, whipping him. And that's the idea we've got fixed in our head. We actually have no idea what a modern slave looks like. And that's because, as the Salvation Army, one of the agencies in the field, describe it, they are hidden in plain sight. So imagine you're running a slave gang. Would you dress them as I just described in that 18th century, in the period they were for that period of 350 years? And would you walk behind them with a whip down the high street if you wanted them not to be noticed? Possibly not. What would you do? Dress them like everybody else. So how are you supposed to notice slaves? Well, there's a very simple answer to that, and that is find out. And you can find out on two very good free downloadable apps for anybody who has a smartphone or anybody else. Just go on to the website of Stop the Traffic with a K, no C in the traffic, Stop the Traffic. And that's both a website and an app. And also Unseen. The secret is in the name. They are unseen. Not only are they unseen, but they're also voiceless. And we're asked to speak up for the voiceless, aren't we? And they're voiceless because at least half of them are immigrants who do not speak the language by and large. And also because do you remember the definition? Total control under threat of violence. Total control through the threat of violence. So they daren't make the phone call. They don't know what will happen to them, or perhaps their little sister back home that's known by the person who recruited them. Yes, recruited them. And they almost certainly don't have a mobile phone either. So if anybody's going to make that call, it's got to be us. They never will. Now, I feel that, forget the fact that I'm an Amnesty member, have been for 50 years, and I want to make a difference. That's why I'm an Amnesty member. But I just think as a plain citizen, in the 21st century, I've got something of a duty to look out for people who are that vulnerable, being that exploited, and report them on the National Slavery Helpline, which is 08000 121 700, and you'll find it on the Unseen app. Now that's
Simon, I've asked Paul to share your slides so the audience can see the number.
Oh, great, great,
and
excellent. I can see them too. Okay, so the top one is Unseen, and the fourth one is Stop the Traffic. And the Stop the Traffic one tells you how to spot the signs in all sorts of different situations. And there are many different situations where you can see slaves, but there are some pretty typical ones. So the first place is brothels. We may not all go to brothels, but if anybody ever goes to a brothel, my strong advice would be not to. But secondly, do please understand that over half of the people in brothels are enslaved and are forced into the sex slave industry. There is a really shocking BBC 4 film that you can find on the iPlayer, which I think is called Doing Money, and it's about a girl who untypically was snatched off the streets and forced into sex slavery. More often, they're recruited by the boyfriend-lover technique, who tells them one thing and then sells them into prostitution after getting off an EasyJet flight, or actually it's usually Ryanair, I think, from Eastern Europe often, but all sorts of destinations to Stansted. The next typical situation you'll see, and the more typical situation I hope you'll see, is walking along an ordinary residential street, and you see a van pull up, often a white, but it doesn't have to be a white van, and more people get out after a work shift and go into the house than you might think it ordinarily might contain if a wife and 2.5 kids live there, a husband, wife and 2.5 kids live there. Now that's a red flag. Another red flag is you're in a workplace and people often arrive in the same white van or in some other vehicle, but they're under someone's control. All these things are described very well in the apps, the first and fourth app. And then the second and third, the Safe Car Wash app, is another very typical situation where there are slaves. They're highly vulnerable to modern slavery. And if you download the app, it tells you what to look out for and asks you a series of simple questions. And you submit the form to, I think it's the Modern Slavery Helpline, but anyway, whoever operates it. And they may come back to you and ask some questions. And your observations will, if you like, create a score, and that will be passed on to the police if the score is low, and they will go and investigate. They, the gang master, Labour Abuse Authority, Inland Revenue, all sorts of teams are out there to stop this from happening. And the third one is about agriculture. Is it the third one? Yes, the third one's about agriculture, and it's called the Safe Farm Worker app. And that's really good to help you to spot things in the countryside if you're hiking, which might be suspicious, might be a red flag. And those would include people getting out of a caravan, an old, rather ancient caravan, and going to work, or getting out of, even worse, a shipping container and going to work, going about their business. Now, it's perfectly possible that shipping container could be used as a sort of storage facility on a farm, but it may not be. So the police don't ask us to be a member of a jury and to make up our minds as to whether there is something fishy going on. No, they just beg us to go to any police website and go onto their modern slavery unit. They will ask you to get in touch with them if they think, if you think there is something odd, something fishy, sum it up. If it ain't right, it sort of, you feel uncomfortable. Women are also extremely good, I'm afraid, in my experience, as distinct from men, and I talk in particular about myself, at being intuitive. Women can read a human situation much better than most men. You know, you're out shopping and your wife says, Fred didn't look very well today, did he? And I might answer, oh, did we see Fred? Or I might say, oh, didn't he? Just because I don't have those intuitive powers that women often have. So if you have that sort of...
On that topic, Simon,
yeah,
because you're unable to see me, perhaps the intuitive power of us running slightly over time hasn't kicked in. So
okay, well, I'm nearly there.
Okay,
I'm nearly there.
If you could wrap up shortly, that would be great. Thank you.
Sure. So use your intuition, and the apps teach you to hone your intuitional skills. The last two apps are about preventing the demand. We are the demand because we're buying goods that have slavery in the footprint. Nestle, Mars, Cadbury from the Ivory Coast is absolutely typical. Every time you buy a £1 bar of chocolate, you are perpetuating slavery. And with those two apps, the first one is about apparel. You put in the name of the brand, it gives you a score, and it gives you a much, much better alternative. The second one, the Gicky app, you zap the barcode on the product, and that gives you the ability to, well, it immediately comes up with a score and rates the product and gives you similar priced alternatives with a much better score on all counts of ethical consumers. So I just want to finish by saying that you really are powerful. You wouldn't be a member of Amnesty International if you didn't think you could make a difference. And I can tell you, having been an Amnesty member for 50 years, that I understand the difficulties in average cases, if you like, the run-of-the-mill human rights cases with a prisoner of conscience, or indeed an entire people, how difficult it is to change. But here, one of the very susceptible people is industry, and we can make them change by doing these small things, particularly through those last two apps. So it's in our hands as to whether there will be, in a decade's time, maybe 500,000 slaves in the UK. They're currently increasing exponentially, or whether we will have eradicated it once and for all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Simon. Just to emphasise to people that didn't catch it earlier, you're doing the 900-mile bike ride. I believe you've already raised over £3,000 for the charity is Anti-Slavery?
Yes, Anti-Slavery International.
Anti-Slavery International. We've just got time for one question, which has come through from Anjona. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, Anjona. We know that there have been large-scale issues of modern-day slavery in Kettering. However, when identified, the criminal justice system has failed to get a prosecution. What legislative changes do you think we need to happen to bring more successful prosecutions and give more support to victims?
I'm not sure that criminal prosecutions are the answer. On a global scale, 0.5% of slave holders are prosecuted, 0.5% in cases where slaves are found. And those who are found are the tip of the iceberg. So I'm not saying that criminal justice should not be meted out, but I think we need to be more strategic than that. We need to find a much better solution, and that, in my view, lies in our hands by at least stopping it by the reporting technique, but also ceasing the demand and, where appropriate, ensuring that civil actions for huge damages are brought against companies like Nestle, Mars, Cadbury, and that's currently being done in 2 states in the US, California and Washington DC, and you can find that article in The Guardian from February, I think, facing lawsuits in the US, it says.
Thank you very much, Simon, and best of luck with the rest of your cycle ride.
Okay, thank you very much. Bye.
Okay, thank you. Bye. Okay, before our next 2 panelists, many of us will have been avidly waiting the outcome of the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin for the brutal murder of George Floyd, and will have been relieved that a guilty verdict was handed down last month. We hear that his legal team have requested a new trial, and so this case is far from over, but important steps have been taken in the right direction. Quoting from Oliver Loughlin, "The protests in the wake of Floyd's murder have been called the largest in US and global history. They reached more than 50 countries. In the US, tens of millions of dollars were raised and invested in grassroots communities and advocacy in a decentralized network that lobbied politicians and pushed through voter registration. It all made a deep impression on the public consciousness. Chauvin simply would not have been brought to trial on these charges, let alone convicted, were it not for these tireless efforts." We now have 2 guests who can be proud of the role they played in raising consciousness in this area, and specifically in organising the Kettering Black Lives Matter protest on the 12th of June last year. Students at Kettering Buccleuch Academy, Mia and Offie. Mia and Offie, if you could switch on your webcams. Great, thank you. So welcome, and I'd like to start by asking Mia, first of all, prior to the event last June, would you have described yourself as an activist? Had you been involved in anything like this before?
Prior to the protests, I'd been interested in social issues such as climate change, the Me Too movement and racial equality. And I usually would post about these issues on my social media accounts. And as an aspiring journalist, I would write articles about these issues. And then amongst a group of like-minded people, we took advantage of the media attention which surrounded the tragic and unjustified murder of George Floyd to both honour him by kneeling for 9 minutes and to protest the mistreatment of BAME groups in our community.
Thank you. And Offie, how about yourself?
So unlike Mia, I wouldn't have considered myself an activist at all, to be honest. I'd seen a lot of sort of posts on social media relating to things to do with racism, and sometimes I had like sort of shared them on my story, but I never really was, you know, sort of like aware it's something I could get involved in the way that I did. And I'm really glad I did, because I think it's definitely one of the best decisions that I've ever made. But yeah, I sort of saw it as something more catered towards adults, but I'm really glad that I got involved.
Good. Okay. And what were the key things that motivated you to get involved at that point?
So racism was and is something that I feel really strongly about, especially being a person of colour that's sort of grown up in a predominantly white society. So I sort of, growing up, didn't really feel as if I had a way to voice that. And when sort of George Floyd died and there was just sort of this spark and it came up with this opportunity where I could actually talk about it, I felt as though it was sort of my place to do so, and to sort of like give a voice to people who may have felt the way I did growing up. And yeah, just sort of, you know, voice their opinions and show that actually, despite, you know, being young and being Black or Asian or just an ethnic minority, you do have a voice and like you can be listened to.
So when we spoke previously, you told me that you felt that your own school, KBA, has a good process for dealing with complaints or issues raised, and that it's perhaps improved over the last year. We hear of many colleges where sadly that isn't the case. Do you have any advice or ideas for anyone listening who doesn't feel they're adequately being heard or responded to in their school or even their workplace?
I think it's definitely something you can bring towards the school to, you know, sort of propose maybe like groups or sort of discussions, maybe assemblies. I know that's something my school's done, where we have informed time, these little sort of like discussions where we cover, you know, important topics in society. And I think sort of to propose those kind of things is a really good idea, because it gets these discussions talking. It sort of, you know, really like changes these opinions. So I think that's definitely something that you can do, sort of talk to teachers, talk to the principal, just, you know, email, try and just get any little thing that you can do. The little things will, you know, they really add up and they really do matter.
Okay. Back to Mia, in terms of practical steps, when you decided that you wanted to get involved in organising the event, what practical things, what steps did you take to organise it, and was it easier or more difficult than you expected?
100% more difficult. Like, we never anticipated the enormous size of the protest. You know, we thought it was going to be a small group of young people protesting outside the council offices. And knowing the power of social media, we decided to create a Facebook event, which ended up getting, I think, 3,000 likes on the page, 3,000 people interested in it. And the actual event had over 500 people turn up. So obviously it was last June, and it was during COVID-19 pandemic. It was during a lockdown. So we had to take a lot of steps and team up with you know, YouthWorks and the Kettering Town Centre Youth Partnership to provide things like masks, chalk to mark out 2-metre markings, hand sanitizer, things like that to make sure the event was safe. And we also liaised with the police to make sure that it was safe as well. And as an aspiring journalist, I took on the role of communicating with groups and managing social media, which I felt, you know, was the best role that I could have done, because I was using my skills that I already had to help others.
And did you get a positive response from the local police?
The local police were actually amazing. They were really, really helpful. You know, they told us our laws and our rights, what we could and what we couldn't do. So obviously we couldn't do it outside of the council offices, but they proposed a new like place for us to do it, which was the park. So yeah, they were really helpful.
And what other organisations did you mentioned YouthWorks and?
Yeah, so we worked with Kettering Town Centre Youth Partnership, who provided us with hand sanitizer, and we also ordered black and red masks, which obviously are the themes for VLM. And then we also worked with YouthWorks, who you know, hosted meetings and also provided a place for us to make signs.
Great. Back to Offie, what do you think attendees can do to support and get more involved in being anti-racist?
I think it's such a small thing, but one of the best things, honestly, that you can do is just talk to people, talk to your friends, your family, because I feel like you will give this message and this idea to someone and they'll think, actually, I do agree with that. Then if they do happen to get into the discussion with someone else, they then pass that message on, it passes on. It's how these sort of things pass through society. And I also think another really important thing is social media, because the world is so interconnected just through the internet. I see a lot of infographics and things like that on Instagram, and it's just like you can share them on your story, you can repost things, even like Facebook, Twitter, like every platform is sort of has a way where you can share things that you see. And so I think, yeah, both social media and just talking to people are one of the best things you can do, as well as the Amnesty website, which has a lot of petitions and places you can donate and things like that.
Okay, thank you. So Mia, you'd mentioned that the pandemic obviously created challenges for the event, and it's created challenges for physical meetings throughout the year, but do you have any plans for follow-up events or actions?
Well, at the moment, we're currently focusing on working within schools. So we've been working with teachers, emailing teachers, trying to get them to reach as many young people as possible, because obviously young people are the way forward, they are the future, and we felt that that was the best way to work. After COVID, we actually were talking about holding a culture fair for young people at YouthWorks. So obviously when big events like that can happen and we can do that all safely, we want to hold a culture fair which will celebrate minority cultures in Kettering and the surrounding areas, and it'll involve like food, music, dance, and it will be a celebration of diversity in our town.
Sounds like a great idea. Okay, just one last question for both of you, and then if Paul could show us some pictures, and then we've got at least one question from the audience. How would you say your experience of helping to organise this event has made a difference to you? If we start with you, Mia.
Honestly, I feel so much more educated and open-minded since the protest. As an ally, it has allowed me to use my voice to amplify others and listen to voices that sometimes get drowned out, and further educate people how to be anti-racist instead of being complicit and not speaking out, which I feel like is what I was doing before. Being united with the community to raise awareness about a common cause was really incredible, and seeing the turnout and support from the community was literally the most overwhelming feeling ever. I feel so proud to be part of a group that is working towards a fair and equal society.
Thank you. And Offie?
I think it gave me like a massive confidence boost, definitely, because it's just I sort of saw like I am able to do this, and I am able to have people listen to what I have to say, and that was definitely reinforced by a lot of support afterwards. I'm not sure about Mia, but I know I had a lot of people messaging me afterwards and saying like that was incredible, like I'm really glad that you spoke out. And so yeah, if you asked me like a year before the event, I would have I would have just been like, I don't think I'd be able to do that, but it definitely did help a lot with confidence.
Okay, thank you. Paul, if you could just show the pictures that we have. Thank you. Thank you. And the first question again from Anjona. Over the last few years, there's been a significant reduction in funding to anti-racist and Black organisations in Kettering, but this has not been the case in Corby, where this has increased. And what could be done about this? Maybe this is a question that should go back to Des as one of our new councillors. I don't know if you have anything that you wanted to comment on this, either of you?
I would just say emailing counsellors, sending letters to counsellors. I know it can be a really long process and it can take time for people to get back to you, but those letters do get to them, those letters get read. And you know, putting pressure on those groups to increase funding is really important.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Okay.
I agree with what Mia said. I think definitely reaching out to people who are able to, you know, put that forward and make a difference, even if it does take a really long time, it will, you know, overall have a positive impact.
And then fine. Oh, sorry, Des, did you want to comment there?
Yeah, I was just going to say, as one of the new councillors, there are now 3 Green councillors, both myself and Emily. I think we stewarded at the BLM protest, so we are like invested in this. And so yeah, we just need to get in contact with us and we can see what we can do. Obviously, we need some time to work out our roles as councillors, but absolutely, we'd love to help with this. Yeah.
Thank you. And one last question. Do you think the protests have had a positive and a lasting positive influence and awareness of racism issues in the local area?
I definitely think they do. I think it's still something that I see people talk about every now and then, and I think it's something that people talk about for a long time because it's sort of something they'll remember. It's something completely different. No one sort of expected it to happen, and so I definitely think it started a lot of discussions about racism, and it, as I've said, you know, within schools and assemblies and things like that, is something that's definitely had like a lasting effect.
I agree with Offie. I think it was definitely something unexpected that the people of Kettering just they never expected it to happen. I think it came as a surprise, and I think it actually challenged a lot of people's views. Managing the Facebook page, when we originally posted the event, there was a lot of comments saying, oh, these stupid kids, they don't know what they're doing, like the cases are gonna go up, like you know, they're gonna riot, they're gonna damage things, cause criminal damage, things like that. And you know, we proved them wrong, and I think it gave a good name to the young people of Kettering because it proves that we care about these things, we care about our future, and we can actually do this.
I think we could see the pictures, the powerful pictures, that it was peaceful, it was well organised, and you should both be extremely proud of what you've done. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And before we move on to our final speaker, so that you don't feel I'm ignoring this topic for anyone who's read reports that the Amnesty Office itself has failed to deal with internal allegations of racism, I can agree that it's been dismaying for me to hear about that. As Amnesty volunteers, we work tirelessly to uphold human rights and achieve equal treatment for all people of all backgrounds. In looking at our organisation, we can agree that it's not as diverse as it could be. And one of the motivations for holding this event and others in the Festival of Social Justice programme is to reach out to others and to campaign organisations to be able to diversify our outlook and our reach. And we hope to build on this going forward by partnering with diverse groups within our community. So today we've heard about both environmental and social campaigns, and our final topic covers both of these. Alison Holland was so passionate about safe travel that she started her own not-for-profit organisation to promote safe and sustainable travel. Alison's business, Bright Kids, has won numerous awards, including being recognised for its work to promote active travel by children by being named in the UK's top 100 social enterprises. Alison actively works with schools, local authorities and other organisations to try and get the message across and make a real difference in the local community.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Nick. As she says, I'm Alison Holland, founder of Bright Kids Social Enterprise and an active travel campaigner. Can I have the first slide, please, Nick? Right, I'm going to be talking about the way we travel for everyday journeys and the social issues, social justice issues around this, what the problems are, who this affects, what we've been doing to address this, and what we can all do as individuals or as organisations to address it further. I'll be speaking both from a professional and personal point of view, with some references to Bright Kids, but also about some of the things that I've been involved in our local community, which anyone could be involved with. Can I have next slide, please? First of all, about Bright Kids. Our mission is to promote safe, active, sustainable everyday travel. So that's walking, cycling, scooting, or even taking the bus, because after all, you do have to walk to the bus stop. Next slide, please. So the school run. There is too much traffic for Alex to walk to school, so we drive. This is traffic-inducing traffic. And this is a perennial problem, not just in the UK, but in many countries around the world. Too many children are being driven to school for various reasons. And this is the reason why we started Bright Kids. 18 years ago, when my eldest child had just started school, I realised that there was a problem with congestion outside the school. I'd heard about walking bus schemes, which is when parents take it in turns to walk the children to school in an organised group. They wear the bright yellow jackets so everyone can see where they are. Now, this really took off at our local school, as Nick knows, as she was one of our early volunteer parents. And so I wanted to help other parents to set up similar schemes because they've been such a success for us. So I did this by working with the council and going visiting other schools and giving talks to them, and then writing a website to provide information for other people. Then I got so into it that I really wanted to fund it and do it as a job, not just as a hobby. So I wanted to set it up. I thought at first as a charity, but then I didn't want to have the hassle of having to apply for funding. So then I thought, well, actually, people who want to do these schemes also need these products in order to support the schemes. So I decided to set up what's called a social enterprise, which is selling the products with all of the profit from that going back into covering our costs to provide the information. So we have what's called an asset lock on the business, and it is led by our social mission, which is to promote safe, active, sustainable everyday travel. So now, 17 years later, we provide products and information for councils and schools all across the UK to support their active travel projects. And locally, we also do projects. Next slide, please. Next slide, Nick. Thank you. Right, so let's get back to the issues. Safe. Takes one life every 25 seconds. Drive safe. It takes a moment to realise that that's a car key. A report published this week by Living Streets charity and Agilisis transport consultancy shows that the likelihood of being killed or seriously injured on our UK roads is significantly higher for BAME pedestrians compared with white pedestrians. Also, deprivation affects likelihood. Here in the UK, an average of 5 or 6 people are killed every day on our roads. White people in non-deprived areas in the UK have an average annual pedestrian casualty rate of 20 for every 100,000 people. Every life lost, of course, is a tragedy, but for BAME people in deprived places in the UK, it was 62. That's over 3 times more likely to be killed or seriously injured as a pedestrian if you are in those groups. Safety is also not just about traffic collisions. Poor air quality kills 40,000 people a year in the UK, with young people, the elderly, and those with health conditions being particularly affected. Also, those who live in the most polluted areas tend to be those who are least likely to own a car. Next slide, please. Active. Well, active travel is good because it keeps you active. It's better for your heart. It reduces your chances of getting cancer. They say that there was a report published that says that people who regularly cycle to work are 45% less likely than the general population to get cancer. So that's a pretty big motivation, really, to take that up as a habit. And the long-term health resilience is something that's become increasingly important now because of COVID, and we need to build up our long-term health resilience, not just for ourselves, but for our children. Next slide, please. Sustainable. Did you know that transport is the largest source of carbon emissions? And it's also the fastest growing source. And here in Northamptonshire, over the last 10 years, our use of cars has increased by nearly 1 billion extra miles a year. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. So, positive. What can we do about all of these issues? Well, what we've been doing is starting young. Firstly, we have been working with local schools and doing projects through our Bright Kids and social enterprise. We've been going out to local schools, working with the primaries and also secondary schools, and helping them to engage their whole school community in promoting safe, active, sustainable everyday travel. So that's increasing the number of children walking to school, encouraging cycle training, making the road safer with road safety campaigns, and many, many different initiatives. If you look at the top, you can just see a favourite character of Kettering, Wicky Bear, crossing the road. That's part of a Walk to School with Wicky Bear event that we did with Compass Primary School to raise awareness about the fun side of walking to school. And we have actually worked with quite a few schools in Kettering, including KBA, Southfield, Grange Primary, St Andrews and Compass, to help them to achieve the ModeShift Stars accreditation, which stands for Sustainable Travel Accredited and Recognised. And these schools have really started to take on board what they need to do to help their school community to promote more active travel. The project is called STEPS, which stands for Safe Travel Enabling Pupils and Schools, and it has been supported by the Police and Crime Commission as well. And next slide, please. So I said I talk not just about what I do within work, but what I've done as an individual. Now, last year with COVID, the government actually has really stepped up what they're trying to do to promote active travel, and they announced some funding that was available to highways authorities, so that's the council. So we were really keen, personally I was really keen that this money should be spent well, and that they should engage with the community to make sure that they had an influence on how this was done, and also that the schemes, when put in, would be accepted and supported to make them a success. So I set up a local active travel advocates network through Twitter called the Northants Streets for All, and that included us doing various posts on Twitter to try and encourage people to engage with the consultation that came around this funding. So we did quite well with this because we managed to persuade the council to launch a survey under the thing called Commonplace, which we then promoted to the county population, and people could go onto this map and mark what they think needed to be done to make the road safer. And there were nearly 2,000 actual comments from the public, so it was really good to get that engagement. Next slide, please. And another thing we've done that we've seen Des earlier, and Des is really the lead with me on this one. This is a Kettering critical mass. We held a couple of large group cycle rides last year through Kettering town centre to give people an opportunity to cycle through their town centre and feel safe by doing it in a group. A critical mass means if people are all together in a large group, they're actually safer, and that is one of the things with cycling. It gives people the confidence to do it who may not otherwise do it. Next slide, please. Next slide, thank you. Right, Save Our Bus. This was a campaign I sort of started in Geddington when we were threatened with losing our bus, and I pestered the contact at the council for as much information as possible, who was actually really helpful. And we also I talked to people like the WI, and I said, look, if you have a bus and you don't use it, if you just take your car everywhere, one day when you do need the bus, it won't be there. It's really important to support services if they're there, even if you've got a car, just try and take the bus occasionally. And then they actually went on and had a trip out together using the bus. So things like that, trying to raise awareness about the need for people to keep using services, otherwise they will be cut. And as a result of that, our bus service in the village was saved because it was going to be cut. Next slide, please. So taking action, I like this little cartoon because it just sums up quite a few of the reasons why it's better to make our streets safer for walking and cycling and give people options. We're not saying everyone should cycle everywhere, just saying, you know, give different options a go, and try and be aware that it takes individuals to change as well as organisations. So let's next slide, please. One of the really important things in order to make it people more comfortable walking or cycling is to have safe infrastructure. Now, the money that the government has available, they will spend it, but they will only spend it in communities where they have good plans in place and they are proving community engagement. So it's really important that people in the community understand what these changes can do, the effect they can have, and the benefits that they can bring to everybody. So this little cartoon just sums it up very nicely about the cleaner air and saving lives, and it's rather COVID focused, talking about key workers getting to work, because obviously now it's lots of people getting to work, but really showing how the street space needs to be reallocated to favour more different modes of transport. Next slide, please. So what can you do personally in your community? You can see the sign here, the road open for. These are some signs that we designed in partnership with the charity Playing Out. Now they help communities to set up road closures just for a few hours in their street so kids can go outside and play again safely. So there are lots of campaigns similar to that and resources, and we try to list them on our website, but that's an example of something that a grassroots community or even just a group of parents can do. Also, schools are really, really important. Schools have such a potential to be doing as much as possible to promote active travel. KBA are doing really, really well with their active travel plan, and they've got their team here of active travel ambassadors. But it's also about you as an individual. You can choose to maybe take a bike instead of a car for a journey. You can choose to take part in a consultation when it comes about the changes in your area. You can choose to write to your councillor to tell them what you favour. And so there's absolutely loads that you can do as an individual. Next slide, please. So that's me, Alison at Bright Kids. I mentioned at Brightways as well. Brightways is actually the adult version and our new overall name, which encompasses Bright Kids. And those are our two website addresses. Please get in touch with me if you'd like any more information. Thank you.
Alison, you actually go into schools and help support them with how to do some of that work in terms of writing to their council and campaigning, don't you?
Yes, that's all part of the projects that we do with schools, is engaging them in local democracy and making them realise that their letter actually does get read by councillors.
Thank you. I have a question, and then very conscious of the time, we're going to need to wrap up quite quickly. And this may be for yourself and Des again. Do you want to see Kettering or Northants institute low traffic neighbourhoods? It's a bit of a controversial issue, low traffic neighbourhoods, because it's caused a lot of problems in London, because a lot of them were put in without full consultation with the local neighbourhood. So I wouldn't say yes straight away, but what I would point out is that we actually have low traffic neighbourhoods that lots of people would absolutely hate if we took them away. If you look at some like St Peter's Avenue, it's got a block part way down, so they don't get the rat running traffic going through. Now, if people don't like change, so I'm sure they wouldn't like us to, well, anyone to take that away. So there's potential to have what's called low traffic neighbourhoods put into other parts of our town, which would make life much better. But it has to be done in consultation with the local people and looking at what the implications are. But
doing nothing is not an option either. What do you think, Des? Because as a councillor, I think you should come in on this.
Absolutely, yeah. As Alison says, as a Green councillor, I think active travel is part of our remit, something we're very keen on. The fact that, just to highlight that nearly 1 billion extra miles were put onto Northamptonshire's roads in 10 years, and that transport is the #1 source of CO2 emissions in the UK. So something has to be done, and we need to try and discourage car use. I think any journey under a mile, it should be made easier the easiest option should be like to bike, to walk, to like scoot. We've got the e-scooters and the e-bikes in Kettering. That should be the easiest option. But we don't want to take people's cars away, because people don't like that, and they are still needed. Rural areas don't have the bus services. So people do still rely on their cars, but it needs to be made the easier option, to reduce air pollution, to increase the health of people, and to improve the town centre as well, because the more footfall you get, the more shops there'll be.
Okay, thank you, Des. Thank you very much, Alison.
Thank you.
So just to close off then, this year Amnesty reaches its 60th anniversary. Unfortunately, it's not really something to celebrate. The human rights situation in many countries is deteriorating. Palestine, Myanmar, China, India, I could list so many countries where ordinary people are oppressed and denied their basic rights. Closer to home, we see examples of the UK government trying to introduce new legislation to curb our rights to peaceful protest, which we've seen from today is a really important thing for us to be able to do. The government's trying to make it even tougher for asylum seekers and curtail the Human Rights Act. We've heard today about the history of this area, from the Newton rebels, William Knibb, the Corby mothers who campaigned. And what we can celebrate is the amazing power of people now rising up and using their voices for local and global campaigns. We've been given a flavour of how people of all ages and backgrounds have been motivated to speak up and make a difference on the issues that mean the most to them. We'll be sending out summary notes and actions, and I'd encourage everyone on the call today to think about how you can use your voice to make a difference. Thank you so much to all of our speakers for your time in preparing and attending today, and thank you to everyone who has tuned in. Enjoy your evening. Thank you.